After 27 years of silence, Prince William did what no one expected. He opened Princess Diana's tomb, but what he saw inside wasn't just personal. It left him pale, speechless, and visibly shaken. What was hidden for decades? And why now? This moment has stunned the entire royal world. The forbidden door opens. 27 years after Princess Diana's tragic death, something unimaginable happened. Prince William, now a future king and father of three, stood before his mother's sealed tomb, a place he had avoided for nearly 3 decades. But on this day, the air was different. A heavy silence loomed. The forbidden door was about to open. Permission for the exhumation had been granted quietly, buried beneath layers of royal protocol and legal paperwork. Only a handful of insiders knew it was happening. It wasn't done for ceremony or press. It was done for truth. And truth demanded that the past be unearthed. The site was Althorpe, Diana's childhood home, where her body had been laid to rest in 1997 on an island in the Oval Lake. For years, it remained untouched. But behind the scenes, a discovery, possibly a letter fragment or new forensic evidence, had pushed the family to act. The final decision, however, came down to William. He agreed, reluctantly, quietly, but with purpose. Security around the area was airtight. No press, no family except for William. Medical experts, forensic teams, and royal advisors flanked him silently as they approached the crypt. The wind barely moved. The lake was still. It was as if the land itself knew what was about to happen. When the tomb's stone covering was shifted aside, the temperature dropped. A sudden, inexplicable chill rushed upward, as if the past had been waiting to breathe again. The moment the coffin came into view, William's face changed. His usual composure, practiced, polished, princely, cracked. He went pale. So pale, one witness described it as the color leaving his soul. As the light hit the casket, the sealed reality of his mother's final resting place became real in a way it never had. Not through grainy photos, not through public mourning. This was Diana, as she had been left, sealed in wood and secrecy. And now her son was standing face to face with the silence she had left behind. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stared. Eyes wide, jaw locked, heart pounding. And yet, this was only the beginning. First glimpse inside the tomb. The first look inside Diana's tomb stunned everyone present. The coffin, though sealed for nearly 3 decades, had held its form well. But the artifacts surrounding it, the remnants of a life interrupted, told a darker story. Items buried with her had deteriorated. Fragments of personal letters, a rosary, and a once beautiful silk scarf lay faded and frayed near the base. Even more disturbing was the condition of the burial chamber itself. Sections of the stonework appeared tampered with. A small panel, once believed to be decorative, was slightly ajar. Scratches around the seal suggested it had been opened, or at least disturbed, sometime after the original interment. That finding alone sent chills down the backs of the forensic team. But it was when the coffin was carefully unsealed, with William's strained nod of approval, that things shifted from solemn to shocking. Inside, the body was partially preserved, but showed signs that didn't align with official reports. Experts noted unusual fractures along the ribs and pelvis, inconsistent with the documented car crash injuries. There were also bruises along the shoulder blades and evidence of possible restraint marks on the upper arms. More concerning still, traces of surgical tampering on areas not noted in her original autopsy. A sealed pouch tucked beside the body was discovered containing what looked like a personal note, discolored, partially torn, but legible in parts. On it, faint words, "Betrayal, protect, they lied." It was impossible to verify on the spot, but enough to jolt everyone in the room into complete silence. One medical advisor reportedly whispered, "This changes everything." William, seeing all of it, the artifacts, the scars, the suggestion of secrets buried with her, stepped back, visibly shaken. His breathing grew shallow, his eyes fixed on the letter fragment, unable to process what he was looking at. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. And this wasn't just a revisiting of grief. It was a doorway into a truth someone had tried to bury with her. What had been hidden was now on the verge of exploding. The medical findings that shocked experts. As the tomb was resealed and Diana's remains carefully transferred to a private medical facility for further study, the room shifted from ritual to investigation. A team of forensic pathologists, toxicologists, and trauma analysts, hand-picked under royal confidentiality, began to quietly piece together a truth that had never been told. What they discovered shocked even the most experienced professionals. While the official 1997 autopsy attributed Diana's death to internal injuries caused by blunt force trauma in a car crash, new imaging and tissue analysis revealed inconsistencies. Several fractures did not align with the crash's described impact angle. A rib break near the sternum, a fracture in the hip joint, and microfractures along the collarbone raised immediate red flags. One doctor reportedly said, "These are not the injuries you'd expect from a high-speed frontal collision, not in this pattern." Equally disturbing were the bruising patterns. Marks around the wrists and upper arms suggested possible restraint or handling in the moments before impact, signs overlooked or dismissed in the original autopsy. They were faint, nearly gone, after so many years. But they were there. Even more perplexing was the presence of surgical traces. On Diana's abdomen, there were incision marks and signs of internal interference. Experts noted that one organ had been removed and stored separately, a highly unusual act unless specifically instructed. But there were no surviving records authorizing such a procedure. Then came the toxicology. Despite decades of decomposition, trace elements of unknown compounds were found in preserved tissue samples. Not enough for confirmation, but enough to raise serious suspicion. A foreign chemical compound not linked to medications Diana had ever been prescribed. These weren't just anomalies, these were contradictions. Violent, deliberate inconsistencies that made one terrifying conclusion begin to take shape. This wasn't just a crash. It may have been staged. Privately, the pathologists debated whether to inform William immediately. But word spread quickly through royal channels, and within hours, a protective wall was being built around the findings. The palace's lawyers were briefed. PR strategists drafted statements in case the story leaked. One insider later described the atmosphere as controlled panic. For William, the truth was unraveling, and it was darker than anything he had ever been prepared to face. William's emotional collapse. Back at the estate, away from cameras and ceremony, Prince William unraveled. The strength he'd held through every interview, every appearance, every year since 1997, finally cracked. He had stood like a soldier beside his mother's coffin as a child. He had walked the path from grief to duty, never once publicly breaking. But what he saw inside that tomb broke through everything. After hearing the full report, William left the briefing room in silence. No questions, no objections. just an unreadable stare. But as he reached the corridor outside, one of his closest aides saw it happen. His shoulders slumped, his breath grew shallow, and he braced himself against the stone wall as if the weight of history had finally caught up with him. He whispered one line, "They lied to me." He wasn't just grieving anymore. He was in shock, and he felt betrayed, not just by the people responsible for the cover-up, but by a system that had kept him in the dark for 27 years. His mind flashed back to everything he'd been told growing up, about the crash, the doctors, the official version of events. All of it now felt like a script, a lie written to protect someone else's truth, not his mother's. As the grief overwhelmed him, tears came, quiet at first, then uncontrollable. It was not the sobbing of a broken man, but the silent tears of someone who had kept everything buried for too long. And now, standing in the aftermath of a discovery he never asked for, it all came flooding out. His advisors rushed in, offering comfort, tissues, support. But William wasn't listening. He was staring at the far wall, lost in memory. The final phone call, the funeral walk, the headlines, the betrayal. "All this time," he said, "all this time, we were honoring the wrong story." By nightfall, a new fire had lit inside him. This wasn't over. He had walked into that tomb for closure. Instead, he walked out with a mission. Scraps of a hidden letter, or clue. Just when investigators thought they had seen everything the tomb had to reveal, something else appeared, small, fragile, and almost missed. A burial assistant, scanning the edge of the coffin's interior, noticed a folded object pressed beneath a decaying velvet lining. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just age-worn parchment tucked against the wood. But when carefully lifted and unfolded, it revealed part of a handwritten letter, smudged by time and moisture, but unmistakably real. One corner bore the initials D.S., Diana Spencer. It was not a full letter, but the words that remained were chilling. "If something happens, protect William. They'll say it was fate, but I know better." Another line, barely legible, read, "I fear betrayal within." The writing matched Diana's well-documented style, slanted, emotional, personal. Experts immediately halted all activity. The fragment was photographed, sealed, and handed to an archivist for immediate preservation. News reached William within the hour. He demanded to see it, alone. In a private room with gloves and trembling hands, he read the remaining words. Though faded, they pierced straight into his heart. This wasn't just a mother's farewell. It was a warning, a plea, a prophecy. Until now, Paul Burrell's claims about hidden letters had been brushed off by the palace. But this was tangible, and it was inside her tomb. Advisors debated whether this note connected to the others Diana had written during her final months, many of which had gone missing or were rumored to be destroyed. Some had alleged she'd hidden messages in different locations, fearing surveillance. If this was one of them, the full truth might still be out there. For William, that letter fragment changed everything. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew something." It confirmed what his heart had long feared. His mother died scared, not just of the press, not just of the paparazzi, but of people she once trusted. And now, with this note in hand, William realized he had evidence. Not just suspicion, not just grief, but proof that something had been deeply wrong, and someone, somewhere, had tried to bury it with her. But it didn't stay buried. Not anymore. The royal reaction behind closed doors. Within hours, the discovery reached the highest levels of the royal household, and the reaction was immediate. The palace went into crisis mode. Senior aides gathered at Clarence House for an emergency strategy meeting. King Charles was informed first, followed by Queen Camilla. Sources behind the scenes described the atmosphere as tense, staggered, and visibly shaken. Even the most composed advisors struggled to find a calm spin for the facts that were now emerging. The official palace line was to downplay the event, a scheduled maintenance and respectful preservation review. But no one inside the firm believed the public would buy it, not when whispers of the medical findings and letter fragment were already leaking. The situation was too big, too emotional, and too tied to public memory. Charles reportedly urged discretion, saying, "This must not become another media circus." But those in the room could tell. He was rattled. The fear wasn't just about headlines. It was about what else might come out. Camilla, on the other hand, stayed mostly silent. One source close to the family described her demeanor as composed but cold. Another claimed she was the first to raise the possibility of legal containment, suggesting media outlets be warned off with defamation threats if leaks intensified. But the reality was clear. They were cornered. The public loved Diana. They always had. And now, with William at the center of this unraveling storm, not as a prince, but as a son in search of justice, the palace couldn't afford to look like it was hiding something. Private calls were made to lawyers, press secretaries, and key allies in government. Damage control statements were drafted. The line had to be walked carefully, deny nothing, but confirm little. Meanwhile, inside Kensington Palace, William was making a very different call. He wasn't interested in spinning the story. He wanted the truth. "This isn't about the crown," he told his advisors. "It's about my mother." But behind closed doors, others saw it differently. A quiet power struggle had begun, not just over Diana's memory, but over the future of the monarchy. And for the first time in years, the royal machine didn't feel untouchable. It felt vulnerable, because a tomb had been opened, and with it, so had decades of silence. Leaks, headlines, and the media beast. By morning, the silence had shattered. Despite tight restrictions and confidentiality agreements, details from the tomb had leaked. Not fully, but just enough to ignite a storm. A few photos, a whisper of a letter, hushed comments from a shaken royal aide. That's all it took. The headlines were everywhere. Prince William shattered by shock, tomb discovery. Fragments of Diana's final letter found, feared for her life. Was it really just a crash? Tabloids seized the moment, unleashing full-page spreads with mock-ups of the tomb, imagined reconstructions of the letter, and timelines connecting Diana's death to a decades-long cover-up. Television news ran expert panels, analysts, body language specialists, all dissecting every detail of William's movements since the exhumation. The internet? Unstoppable. On TikTok, emotional tributes to Diana surged, many ending with her 1995 Panorama interview and the haunting quote, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." On Reddit, conspiracy threads lit up with millions of views, reviving everything from MI6 involvement to speculation that Diana had tried to fake her own death. Twitter trended with hashtag Justice for Diana, hashtag The Tomb Truth, and hashtag William Knows. The royal PR team scrambled to contain the fallout. A carefully worded statement was released. His Royal Highness Prince William recently visited the memorial site of his mother, Princess Diana, for private and personal reflection. Any rumors beyond this are speculative, but it was already too late. Behind palace walls, panic turned into frustration. Charles feared this might undo years of hard-won stability. Camilla's team worked overtime to keep her out of headlines, but her name was beginning to surface again, especially in online posts linking the symbolic memory of Diana's suffering to the royal machine still in power. Some advisors urged William to make a public statement. He refused. "This is not something I explain to the press," he reportedly said. "It's something I resolve in truth." As the monarchy staggered under the weight of its past, one thing became clear. The story of Diana was no longer finished. It had just been reopened. Theories resurface, old wounds reopen. With the media frenzy now global, attention turned to what many had tried to forget: the original crash and the questions that never went away. In 1997, the official story was clear. Diana died in a tragic accident, caused by a drunk driver trying to flee paparazzi. But now, every detail was being pulled apart again, and millions were asking, what if that story was never real? Names from the past returned like ghosts. Dodi Fayed, Diana's partner, also killed in the crash. Henri Paul, the driver, blamed entirely, but reportedly not drunk according to new disputed toxicology. The white Fiat Uno, the mysterious car seen brushing Diana's vehicle before it entered the tunnel. And of course, Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, who for years claimed the crash was an assassination. She was pregnant. They couldn't allow it, he once said. They silenced her. At the time, these were dismissed as emotional ramblings, but now, in the wake of the exhumation, people were listening differently. Paul Burrell's long-ignored claims that Diana gave him a note predicting her death were back in focus. The language of that note eerily mirrored the fragment found in the tomb. Words like fear, betrayal, and accident now sounded prophetic. Suddenly, what was once brushed off as tabloid noise began to sound like a pattern. Even respected journalists were re-entering the conversation. Old BBC producers admitted privately that there had been pressure to avoid pushing deeper into the what-ifs surrounding the crash. Former royal staff, long retired, began speaking anonymously, describing Diana's growing fear in her final months, her belief that her phones were tapped, and her suspicions that she was being watched. And the public? They remembered. The candlelight vigils, the sea of flowers outside Kensington Palace, the feeling that her death never truly made sense. For many, the tomb had become more than a physical space. It was a symbolic wound, reopened, bleeding again, and impossible to ignore. And as questions swirled louder than ever, William stood at the center of it all. The son of Diana, the heir to a throne built on silence, now carrying the one thing no one else ever had, the truth buried with her. William's crusade begins. For most of his life, Prince William had done everything expected of him. He played the role. He wore the uniform. He held the line. But after what he witnessed inside his mother's tomb and what he read in that fragile, half-buried letter, something shifted, not just in him, but around him. This was no longer about grief. This was now a mission. William quietly met with his legal counsel. He made a direct request: reopen the files. Investigate what was missed, buried, or ignored in 1997. He wanted access to medical reports, surveillance records, MI6 logs, even communication between British and French officials at the time of Diana's death. Insiders say he also contacted members of the original Operation Paget team, the unit that had investigated Diana's death in the early 2000s. Many had retired. Some were reluctant. But when they heard who was asking, they listened. "I want the truth," William reportedly told one former official. "Not for headlines, for her." But this wasn't just a private investigation. It was starting to spill into his personal life. Behind the palace gates, tension with King Charles deepened. The king believed digging into the past would only divide the family further. Camilla, already reeling from renewed public scrutiny, was said to be deeply uncomfortable with the direction things were going. And then there was Harry. Despite their well-documented distance, William made contact. The two princes hadn't spoken openly in months, but this was different. Their mother's name still bound them, and if there was one moment to unite, this was it. William told him what had been found: the letter, the inconsistencies, the new questions. Harry listened. Sources close to the Sussex camp described him as shaken and furious, but above all, ready to help. And just like that, the two brothers, once torn apart by the institution, began aligning for something bigger than both of them: Diana's truth. Lawyers were retained across jurisdictions. Meetings began between William's team and international forensic experts. Even the Parisian authorities, once hesitant to reopen anything, were now quietly pulled into the conversation. The Crown had hoped this would stay buried, but now it was moving, and Prince William was leading the charge, not as the heir, but as her son. A tomb spoke, and the throne quaked. In the history of the British monarchy, few moments have ever shaken its core like this one. A tomb opened, a letter found, and a future king, now haunted by the voice of a mother silenced too soon. This wasn't just a mystery. It had become a reckoning. Because when William stepped into that crypt, he wasn't just visiting a grave. He was walking into a sealed chapter of history, one that the Crown had carefully closed, locked, and buried, hoping time would do the rest. But time didn't forget, and neither did Diana. The tomb, once just a place of mourning, had become a messenger. Its silence broken, its secrets spilling into the light. What was once written off as tragedy was now being reconsidered as betrayal. And what began as a personal moment of closure had turned into a public awakening. "The past isn't finished with us," one royal insider whispered. "And Diana never truly left." Inside the palace, fear settled like dust. Not fear of scandal, the royals had weathered plenty, but fear of what this meant going forward. Fear of what else might be uncovered. Fear that the very storyline of modern monarchy, so carefully polished, could now unravel. And at the center of it all stood William. No longer the obedient heir walking behind the coffin, now the truth-bearer, the protector of legacy, the man willing to open doors the Crown had kept shut. Whether the world will ever see the full contents of Diana's tomb remains unclear. But one thing is certain: it spoke to her son. And now the world is listening. "Justice," William whispered once, "she deserves it. And so do we." What happens next? No one knows. But the throne is no longer steady, and Diana's voice is no longer silent. What Prince William saw inside Princess Diana's tomb remains tightly guarded, but those close to him say he hasn't been the same since. This wasn't just a royal visit, it was a reckoning, a confrontation with loss, legacy, and the unanswered questions surrounding his mother's tragic death. For William, it was a private journey into grief, memory, and perhaps truth. And for the world, it's a reminder that some wounds, no matter how royal the blood, never truly heal. One thing is certain: whatever he found that day will shape his path forward as a son and a future king.